Good evening, everyone. This is Patrick with Community Collision Ambassadors. Decided to come outside today, so you might hear a little background noise. Um, Today's topic we was wanting to talk about was Brown versus Board of Education, which this court case went to Supreme Court and was decided in May of 1954. So it's pretty historical, and a lot of people think of it about segregation in terms of race being not being allowed, but it had a large impact into special education. And so that's what I'd like to talk with you about a little bit today. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Brown versus Board of Education was actually a grouping of multiple cases around the country from Kansas, South Carolina, Virginia, and Delaware. And all these cases had, and to quote Chief Justice Warren, all these cases involved minors of the Negro race that, through their legal representatives, seeking the aid of the courts in obtaining admission to the public schools of their community on a non-segregated basis. And that was directly from the decision that Chief Justice Warren had wrote. And nowadays it might be better praised as African American heritage or based off their race, their skin color. And so I'm sorry if it wasn't politically correct to phrase it that way, but I wanted to quote it directly as it was wrote at that time. And so this whole thing started over the 14th Amendment. Equal protection under the laws of the 14th Amendment was basically how all these plaintiffs were petitioning the courts to end the segregation in their areas. And during that time, there was a doctrine of law that is was known as separate but equal, and so that established that as long as the schools were pretty equal, that it was okay to segregate. And so that's kind of background a little bit on what brought Brown versus Board of Education, which was actually a grouping of multiple cases. And so what the plaintiff's argument was that segregated public schools are not equal and cannot be made equal. And that hints they are deprived of the equal protection of the law. And so you might be wondering, how does this go into special education? Well, it opened the door to establish segregated education and asking for equal rights in the educational side of everything. Sorry, just flipping over my page of notes here. There is a few quotes that Chief Justice Warren had wrote into this in the Supreme Court decision, and it's really amazing to actually read through it, and I'll put a link up a little bit later. But Brown versus Board of Education was a 100% agreed upon decision by the justice. So that's pretty amazing at that time for what was going on. And Chief Justice Warren worked really hard. There was one member of the Supreme Court that had a heart attack and was in the hospital. So Chief Justice Warren went there and talked with him and wrote multiple drafts of this decision so that it was a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court. And so I want to go to one of those quotes real quick. And it just kind of resonates with the concept of inclusion and what education means for our kids, or the mindset of an education in terms of how a lot of people think of it. And this was wrote in 1954. It is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if he is denied the opportunity of education. Such an opportunity where the state has undertaken to provide it is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. And you might wonder why it's worded that way. During this time, there were schools in the South that weren't public schools. They were still being paid privately. They were still developing public school systems at that time in some areas. So that's why that little disclaimer of um, where the state has undertaken to provide it was put in, because education at that time wasn't everywhere. Some parents were still paying privately to have education in their areas. But it establishes the need to have education and what will be held back if a child doesn't receive it. So that's pretty impactful still today. And yes, this was wrote in the form of segregation for race, but it's a true statement for all of our kids. If we don't teach them, if we don't work with them, if we don't educate them, they might not learn. They might not be able to have those opportunities that they need as they get older. And I want to go on ahead down to kind of like the last paragraph of Chief Justice Warren's um, opinion letter that the Chief Justice issued. And it's the ruling statement, and it's just a short sentence here is all I'm going to include. And so what they're saying is that segregation is denying them that opportunity, is denying them that equal ability. Now, you might wonder why I want to pick Brown versus Board of Education, and why I wanted to hit mainly just a couple areas real quick. It's because the civil rights are not that of just one person or just one group. These civil rights are for all of us. And so that's why they're important. I know that right now it's the Black Lives Matter is what we hear a lot about. And yes, I didn't understand it the first time I heard it, that, if black lives don't matter, no lives matter. That's true. And that's also true for other groups. If their lives don't matter, no one's life matters. So I kind of start to understand a little better by starting to look at what their movements have done, civil rights movements. The movement that these families had done back in 1954 started the whole movement in the legal system, in the Congress, and all these different legal systems to develop protections for children with disabilities. And when you look over the history line of it, which I hope to be able to cover a little bit later on, we'll see the development of special education from when this was wrote. The kids were denied going to school if there was a public school in their area. Parents in Orange County, parents came together and established their own school from the little history I've been able to read and researching some of the other nonprofits that had existed in Orange County. And that nonprofit actually turned into First Chance Center, by my understanding. And so their histories are amazing when you look at it. And it was these parents back in these times that started developing things and advocating. And the amount of work that has been completed when you look at it is amazing. Us as parents now, we still got to continue to fight for, advocate, not fight. We need to advocate. We need to work with the schools, work with our politicians, work with everyone to understand a mutual understanding of what the needs are and why these rights are important for our kids. If you're in the North Lawrence Community School, Special Needs North Lawrence Community School Group, I made a post earlier. It is referring back to in May of 2014, I believe, when the Inglewood School closed. That was a segregated special education school. It only had students with, basically, from my understanding, severe and profound disabilities, or disabilities that the local schools felt like they couldn't handle. And so children from Orleans, Mitchell, the Bedford school systems, North Lawrence Community School systems, they were all sent there. And so that school existed and was in operation until 2014. And when you listen to the minutes at that school board meeting, which are still available online, and I got a saved copy if anyone ever wants to listen to them, you can hear people arguing Brown versus Board of Education, discussing how those laws played into what that school was doing, and where it might not still be, their actions might be on that borderline of segregated education. And you can also hear where school board members didn't want to really end that, and they wanted to just move the kids from that building that they were closing to the other schools in discrete areas of the school. That was 2014. That was 6 years ago. I can actually remember just starting to get an advocacy around then and learning about that school and learning what was happening and learning why it was closing. And it's just interesting to see where that was happening at. And if I'm rambling, I'm sorry. But then the question would be asked, where are we at in 2020? Is there written plans for working on inclusion? Is there written plans for what an objective is to have an inclusive education for our kids? It was interesting. The 2014 video audio from that meeting, inclusion wasn't a word ever used. It was integrating the students in with normal students. And so it's amazing how the terms change, but the purpose behind them doesn't. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to comment or send a message to Community Inclusion Ambassadors. I'm going to check real quick on Messenger and just see if we got any questions or messages about this episode. Okay. So, in wrapping up, next week is going to be a little bit of a busy week for us on Thursday night. We have our board meeting planned. We're also talking with a guest speaker to come in and talk about some of the services they're providing in the area and that they're developing. So that's going to be a little exciting. I'm going to confirm with them that they're still good to go for Thursday before I announce who it is and what they're coming to talk about. So we'll probably have them speak first, and then we'll go right into our board meeting and start trying to find out how we'll be moving back to in-person activities and planning our Century programs for this fall. As always, thank you for watching. If there's any questions, anything we can do to help, please send us a message. On our Facebook page, Community Inclusion Ambassadors Inc., you can also find a phone number that'll ring right into usually my phone or another volunteer. I thank you all for your time, and you all have a great day.